How you doing? Here we are, second installment of the landscape series. On this one, we're going to be editing and making decisions about the Moss Landing photo right here. All right, so whoops, daisy. So you want to open this one up into Photopea, and we'll get started. And you'll see in the notes that I put down here, it's not in your slideshow, but we're going to be discussing key questions about what some of the key questions that this photo brings up with regard to landscape. The idea of how we use space in the foreground, middle ground, and background, how we deal with a sunset or sunrise situation where the lighting is really, it's kind of extreme and it's hard to expose your camera for all the colors in the sky and on the ground. Okay, so get that open and let's begin. Here we go. All right, so when we look at this, first thing to look at is what are some of the problems? Well, obviously up in the upper left, somebody put their finger right in front of the camera. I was using my old iPhone and shot this picture after surfing one morning. Actually, not after, probably before. It's pretty early. And it was pretty splendorous. This was a nice little day where the light was just flaring like this, gorgeous. But when you take a picture towards the sunset, it's going to either expose, or sunrise in this case, it's going to expose for either the sun, right, and it gets darker in order to capture the color in the sky, or if you want to have all this dark ground that's below you, right, all this silhouetted land, if you have that visible and more exposed with more light on it, then you're going to lose the color in the sky, right? And so when we're shooting sunsets and sunrises, it's good to get more than one exposure, one that captures the color of the sky, one that captures the ground, and we can mix them. But in this case, I didn't do that. So I'm going to try to bring light to the foreground here, all right? Because what's happening is we have this depth in the sky, right? There's a distant sun and the clouds are kind of reaching across. But then the ground is pretty flat because it's so dark. Visually, it's just flattened. All right, so here we go. Let's do a quick edit. And when you open a photo, I want you guys to get in the habit of starting with making a duplicate layer. And this way, you don't have to touch the original photo. We're going to do non-destructive editing. And let's call this layer removal. I'm going to remove the finger directly on the photo right there. And there's a couple tools we could use, but I'm going to just go for the spot healing brush. This is the more automatic one. Click on it. And I want to use a really big brush. Maybe not quite that big. Oh, yeah, that will go a little bigger like that. Get all up in the corner there and just go zap, just bomb it and see what happens. Give it a moment. Did I actually click it? It's freezing up. Let's pause the video. Yep, there it goes. All right. It worked. All right. So at first glance, there's no obvious correction there, right? When you zoom in a little bit, you can see like certain clouds are repeated there, but not too obvious. I'm going to let that be. If you want to fuss over that and mix it up a little bit, go for it. All right. Okay. So next step, what I want to do is bring up exposure in the ground down here. Okay. And so what I'm going to do is simply get an exposure adjustment layer down here, pop that out, and bring up exposure. All right. And this is probably the simplest way to do it. And as I bring up exposure, right, what I'm looking at is the ground. Now imagine this. If the camera was trying to just get all these colors and details in the foreground, then look what happens to the sky. It gets overexposed. This is what would happen in the camera. But we're trying to mix these two different approaches to this particular scene. All right, so I want to bring up exposure down here, but I don't want it up here. All right, so next I do, that's enough detail for now, and I can adjust this more later if I want to. So I see the details down here, and if I turn it on and off, you can see, right, I lose all that color in the water, obviously in the sky. So what I want to do is block some of this exposure adjustment in the sky. So what we have to do first is click on the mask on the right side. And I'm going to use the gradient tool over here. It's this tool over here. You can push G to get it as well. And what this does is it's going to now paint, because I have it on the mask layer here, it's going to paint black to white with gray in the middle. So there's the gradient that it's going to do. It's going to do it in a line, a linear one. And notice you can change it to other types of gradients for different photos. I'm going to keep everything default with normal blend mode and 100% opacity. All right. And if I wanted it to paint the other way, I could push this and reverse it so it goes from white to black, right? And if your colors down here, by the way, are not black and white, push D or just click D right here to put it to the default, right? So I want black on top of my palette. So I got the gradient tool. This is how it works. When you draw a line with it, it will paint a gradient on whatever you have selected in your layers, which is now the mask. So let's do that and pal. Okay. And you can see here in the mask, it is blocking the exposure. Black conceals and white reveals the exposure adjustment. And it's getting some of that color back, but not enough, right? I want to see even more deep color back here. So there's a couple things I could do. I could try to redraw the gradient, maybe starting lower and go down to here. See what that does. There's a little more color. I'm liking that. Okay, and you can see here the gradient or the gradual change, that's what gradient means, is shorter, like more towards the horizon. All right, so now I'm seeing details in the boats, but I've lost detail in the harbor water right here. I want that reflection back. All right, so here's what we could do next is we can start painting on the mask here to bring back some of those details, some of that color. So instead of the gradient, I'm going to use the brush right here. And I'm using a fairly big brush. Actually, I don't want to use that brush. The last brush I used was more of a texture brush. Let's go back to the default, maybe this one here. Right, a round brush. I'm going to soften the edges. See how big it is. I need it bigger than that. Maybe, yeah, about that size, right? About the size of the space in there. All right, and I'm going to put the opacity keep it here, like down low, 60, 70%. Let's go. I'll go 64, okay? And the flow, meaning how fast the paint comes out of the brush, or how fast the black will come out, I want to slow it down a little bit. So I'm trying to do a lighter touch with the black paint in the brush, which will essentially make it a little more transparent, a little grayer. So check it out. I got the black in the paint, and if I go like this, see, it will bring back some of the color that was in the original photo. All right, and I'm gonna do a slightly sloppy job here just to demonstrate. You guys can spend more proper time. You can go over it again and do a double layer right there. All right. And out here in the slough, those distant cars, I don't want the boats to get hit with this paint. All right, and what I'm doing is adding to the mask. You can see tiny bits of change right here in the bottom. All right, now I'm gonna get into the water. Look at that, color's coming back. But I like some of these reflections, so I'm gonna hope that they stay there, those shapes. All right, so see that one spot right there because I double layered right there, so I gotta fix that. But I'll go back in a minute. All right, so we've got this sort of sloppy paint job. And remember, I'm painting with black. Black is on top. If I go and push X, I can put white and reveal it again. See that? So there'll be a back and forth between black and white. And if you change the opacity of it, you can have an even softer touch. I'm going to put it back to black. Down here, back to black, all right? But I have a even less opacity and try that. And you're trying to basically paint expose the mask without it being obvious. All right, and go back and forth. And now check your paintbrush lines like I would fix up above here on the horizon, make that blend better. Right, you go back and forth between white and black at different levels of opacity and try to bring in this foreground. And what this ultimately does is now you have the foreground, which our eyes can latch onto. You got the sky, which is also very textured and colorful, and it's like a sandwich, right? Good sandwich. And with the details on the boats, it just makes our eyes go into the picture a little better, right? Now, this picture would be considered a somewhat of a bigger space landscape, but it's still not a grand, huge space landscape, right? It's more of a middle range detail landscape, you could call this, all right? And that's that.